Hey, I am Mustafa Sharif, and thank you for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Today, we're going to talk about public space making with the very great urban planner from Scandinavia, from Sweden, Alexander Ståhle. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine.
It's
Fine.
snowing outside.
Yeah, we just got winter at last.
Welcome to Sweden. Well, Alexander, usually I give the mic to my guest. So the mic is yours. Who is Alexander? What are you passionate about? And what gets your energy up?
I was brought up in the city, and I've always been very interested in how cities work. Like that's the main question for me. Like, what works, what doesn't work? How can we, if we change the built environment, if we change streets or public spaces or densities or infrastructure, anything, how would that change how cities work for people? Meaning like quality of life, health, equity, climate change, everything. So that's my basic driver. And I was originally trained as a landscape architect. Then I started to do my PhD at School of Architecture, and I wrote my thesis on public spaces and densification. So that was a hot topic. I mean, already in the 90s.
Yeah, and still continue.
Yeah, really. It's always very debated
Yes.
issue. Then I started at Spacescape, developed Spacescape as a consultancy, like a urban planning, urban research studio, working with like early stage complex urban planning projects in Scandinavia. But I always had one foot in the research. So I always had a contact with the School of Architecture. So some years ago, I ran a project on the future of cities and transportation, and then the result of that project was a book that was published some years ago called Closer Together. This is the future cities, like comprehend some scenarios of cities of the future. Now I am doing a research project on future smart streets.
Okay. And you did research about public space making,
Yes.
which is best practices of different public space making in different countries.
Yes, I got the idea because there's so many projects now going. Everyone is talking about public space and
True,
the
true.
like the life between buildings and all these things. So my idea was like, well, we cannot like figure out the best way to work in every project. There must be so many nice experiences, and especially in those cities that has been like these old big cities that has been growing for a long time should have some sort of advanced way of working with public
Like a
spaces.
method or a guideline to work.
Yeah, and also like a culture, like a planning culture, well, where planners, real estate developers, professionals are like mature in their way of working with public spaces, designing them, financing, managing, all this. So I was interested in just seeing where are the best practices. Just go for that and see where are the best public spaces and how were they created, how are they managed.
This was the core of your research question.
Yes.
And how did you choose the countries with this planning culture?
Yeah, the thing is that you have to dig where you stand. So you start like in Stockholm, asking people like where do you think the best projects or the best public spaces are here, and then just starting to ask people in my network. Like, and obviously I have a lot of contacts in the States. So in New York, I started to talk to people, and then that led to some contacts in San Francisco. I've always been very curious about Tokyo, since Tokyo is the biggest city in the world. Obviously, that has to mean something.
Of
Like,
course.
and then like, okay, let's look at the biggest and the oldest cities in Europe, like Paris and London. So the selection process was not. I mean, it was quite kind of simple, looking to the biggest and most developed cities in we say the modern world. But of course I would be happy to go to a lot of other cities around the
Yes.
world, but this was
Yeah, but in the end, you have to limit the
yes,
method, and you
yes, and
cannot.
yes, and also since I was also looking at some planning documents, like what is said in policy documents and planning documents. It would be much easier for me to go to like the States and to Britain, where I can actually read and understand what they're saying. I was very fortunate to, when I went to Tokyo and also to Yokohama in Japan, I was very fortunate to have a guide and an interpreter. So Shingo Sikia, who helped me with a lot of translation of documents and also in the meeting. So I think it wouldn't be possible without his help.
Of course, making life easier for you.
yeah. I mean, he was my only way in there, because Japanese people are not super fluent in English.
Did you learn something in Japanese?
No, I'm sorry, I cannot.
Okay, getting back to your research method.
Yeah, so I start with the question like, which do you think is the best public space in your city? And so that's a good starting point.
Okay.
And then someone would say Bryant Park in New York. And then, okay, so why is it so successful? And then you start talking about what are the qualities of that place. And then, okay, so how was it created? Like, and who paid for the design? Who paid for the construction? And now, how is the management going? So, and same with the square in Tokyo, Ikebukuro Park, which was like some sort of Bryant Park, small park in the very dense area, which really has made through the transformation of being some kind of a not so attractive place with low levels of maintenance and be drug addicts and so have these problems, and then made the journey from being kind of a bad place to a very good place. So it was also interesting to look at places which had made transformations from good to bad, from bad to good.
And the people you met and interviewed, were they from the municipality or different?
It was a mixed game. It was both planners in this city municipality and also property owners. I also talked to researchers, professor at Pratt, David Burney, who has been working a lot with public space development. And also I visited university in Tokyo as well, talking to researchers. So it was academia and private sector and public sector.
Do you see the difference in the culture of planning between these countries?
Yes and no. It's surprisingly similar in the ways that these successful public spaces, you basically want to achieve the similar thing. Like a lively place, a safe place.
The approach is the same. A livable public space.
Yeah, the objective to create these vibrant public spaces which have a diversity of cultures and people and activities and all that. So it seems like the objectives are very similar. Then you could say that it seems like New York has a very long tradition of developing public spaces in collaboration with the private sector. So many of these people I spoke to, even in London and even in Paris, like Tokyo, San Francisco, they were looking at New York because New York was some sort of a role model. They started up the idea of POPs, for example, the privately owned public spaces, and the model to finance public spaces with private money. And so the legislations are a bit different as well. I mean, in Japan, for example, they have a super advanced way of financing public transport and urban development within very complex property structures, which is a model that I think you cannot really see in the States. But since they have, it's strange, but since like in Japan, they have a very strong sense of property ownership, like where the property line is and who is owning land. But on the other hand, they also have a very strong public sector. They seem to be able to do very complex urban transformations with a very strong public sector planning tradition at the same time as they have very strong private sector and strong property owners.
That's very interesting because there is no friction in between these sectors. I mean, they're...
Yeah, I think that it's hard. I mean, if you come to a very different culture such as Japan, it's very hard to see what's behind the surface. And what I understood is that when they are negotiating between the private and the public, it's very much no money involved in Japan. So they're just talking about different kind of investments, but they don't talk about money. It's more like, okay, you can build so much more floor area, but then you have to build that pedestrian tunnel, or so they are negotiating with infrastructure improvements and so on. However, in the US, it's more like upfront what the cost of different things are, and people are negotiating with the actual cost of investments. And also in the States, they have property taxes, and they have different kind of models to tax. There's something called the incremental tax, where they can tax the expected increase of land values. These kind of very advanced taxation, which is not similar in other countries. So there are differences in legislation and taxation models. But I would say that my impression is that in the States, especially in New York, there's a long tradition and a culture of inviting the private to collaborate, and then to write agreements to say that, okay, you pay for that and we pay for this, and so on. And this is very rare, if it even exists in Sweden.
Why do you think it doesn't exist? Or
Yeah,
what are the limitations?
Yeah, I mean, in Sweden we have the long tradition of that the public sector is responsible for public space, and has always been paying for streets and parks and the maintenance. So if you take an example of the Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York, which was the construction was paid for by the city, but the city said, we're not going to build this park if you, the property owners, do not take responsibility of the maintenance. They wrote a contract for the private actors around, and that was mainly the property owners, to pay for the maintenance and the management of that. The interesting thing is that the Parks Department in New York are very happy with this construction. So they thought that they had been influencing, and they have been part of making the construction and the quality requirements for the maintenance, but they don't have to pay for them. It's an agreement.
Yeah, I think it's win-win. But many people think that, okay, if the private sectors get into the public space game, then the space gonna to be a kind of privatized. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from the study I did and from the report is that successful public spaces can be financed, designed, constructed, even planned by the private sector and owned by the private sector, if the public sector is very strong and clear of what it wants, what it demands, and what it regulates. So it's like if you go into a collaboration, you have to be very clear of what your objectives and your goals are, and you have to write the right agreements and contracts, and then you can get that synergy between the private and the public, because there is also gains of getting the private sector in there, because you get their engagement and you get people locally to engage in the public space. And it's not only like if you pay for pavement or brick and mortar and so on, but how to activate the space. Like if you do events, if you can get the private sector to pay for yoga classes or outdoor cafes and so on, you get a win-win. They get to do their activities, which they really want to do, and they pay for them, and they also activate public space, but in the framework that is decided by the public sector.
Exactly that agreed on.
Yeah. So in all of these cities where you have successful public spaces, there is a strong public sector which has been setting limitations of what to do and what not to do. And it's also, of course, always a negotiation. I mean, people may think that sometimes Bryant Park is a bit too commercial or a bit too privatized by, say, a sponsored event or something. But then you can step back. It's to get the sense of the nice balance to at the same time as you invite private interest, you invite everyone. Like you feel the publicness of the space. Everyone is welcome.
Yeah. So in your research, you're mentioning a strong public sector, a strong private sector, and the community. So as I understand now, a strong public sector means that being open-minded to share a public space, to share the management of it, and write a good agreement. And the public sector is strong with their ideas, with their business models, and so on. But how about the strong community? How do we involve them in planning, managing the park? Are they part of the game?
Yeah, I think there are some nice examples. If you take the Friends of the High Line in New York, it's more like they have constructions to do to the management organizations, which is not only owned by property owners, which called business improvement districts, like BIDs, but there are also conservancies, which is a kind of in Swedish is a stiftelse. It's like it's an organization which is tax exempt. I mean, they don't have to pay taxes, but they cannot make any profit. And they can engage a lot of actors and members in such an association. It's not only commercial actors, but also like ordinary people. If you take the Central Park Conservancy, which was one of the first ones, they are not only financed by property owners and companies, they're also financed by donations from private people, and they also organize a lot of community events, so people can come and tidy up places or plant flowers and so on, so they engage people in the place. So also one I think one takeaway from my study is that maybe we should look at these conservancies as maybe the most interesting place partnership model, because if you just have if you just have like an association built on like property owners, you get only one angle or only one interest in that place. I think the conservancies shows that you can have a much broader base of finances, of actors that finance a place, but also a broader platform for engagement, like bring people into a place. So I would recommend that when starting up a place organization, would be interesting to look at more of these dynamic, diverse organizations, which consist of many types of members and donors.
Yeah. When do you think is the best moment to engage the community? Is it in the planning phase, or
I think you have to bring them along all the way. So
process?
To have them in a very early stage, you have to be clear that when you're in a very early stage, ideas can be everything. When you're going into a community dialogue, it's important to define what is possible, so you don't get the wrong expectations. Maybe if people wish for different things to happen. So the longer you come into a place development process, the more narrow the possibilities for new ideas are, and that has to be clear from the organization or the actor that drives the dialogue. Like, what is the field of possibilities to engage and to change a place, or what are the financial limitations?
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it's as early as possible to engage them, also to keep them together hand in hand with the process, and because sometimes they have big dreams. Everyone have big dreams, but in the end they are not realistic because of the budget or of the limitation of the project. So I think it's good that to engage them, they can understand what are the limitations. Alex, you talked about the public space making cycle.
Mm-hmm. I use an illustration which I found in a report from the Urban Land Institute, which describes like urban development cycle. So in my view, if we look at public space as a very center of value creation in, say, an urban district or a place, you can use public space as part of that cycle, as a driver of urban development. The idea is very simple. If you start with a public space that creates value, it creates value for property owners and for businesses. I mean, if you have a restaurant and you have a restaurant at a great park, you get more profit, you get more customers to the restaurant. Take the Japanese, the Tokyo Park as an example. They took some percent of the profit of that restaurant and paid for the maintenance of the park. So it's a very simple idea. There are of course many different kind of values that create not only economic value, but I mean social value and ecological value and all these things. But then if you go into then the planning phase, you can of course enhance the value that the public space created by creating better or more public spaces, or increase densities around a park. The value of a park comes to even more people and properties. Then when the property owner then gets the building permit and the rights, value is realized in that. For example, the property owner can rent more space to some people, like housing or offices, and then the property owner earns money. Okay, so now comes the cycle part of it, is that which is called land value capture, and that mechanism can come in many different forms. You can have property taxes, you can have development impact fees. You can have different kinds of fees. When the value goes up on a property, you can get that back to public space. If you take that fee, you can also pay for the enhancement of public space. And when public space value then raises, it raises property value, and then
you have a loop.
Then we have a loop and a cycle, which hopefully goes in the right direction when you have done a good job. But then, of course, all these different steps in the cycle have to go in the right direction. Yeah. So if you make a bad urban plan, then it's much more difficult to create value. Or if you have a bad maintenance scheme, if you don't maintain the park or the flowers, then the value of the surrounding properties will go down. So that Jane Jacobs has been writing about.
Yeah. This takes me back home to Sweden. Mm-hmm. My question is that why we are not that flexible in planning and managing the public space. What do you think we need to change to achieve that model of co-managing and financing the public space?
Yeah, so I've been working quite a lot with municipalities and planning administrations. So I think there has to be a change of culture in how they approach the public sector. And to start with, I think a very simple thing is you can do like what they did in New York, taking public plaza program as an example. So they made a program in the municipality to say, okay, we want to create new plazas in New York, but we can help you plan and design and build the plazas, but maintenance and management would be done by you and also by contract. So they made a big program which created 70 new plazas in New York. There is a lot of power within the city municipality to create these partnership programs. We can start to, in a systematic way, collaborate with the public sector. But then you need a guidebook for the planners in the municipality to describe how you work, because it doesn't come natural. But if you do a guidebook, a guideline for the collaboration, I think San Francisco had the parklet manual. It's kind of a similar thing, how a system, a model for the collaboration. Then the municipality can start doing that in a more systematic way. Because what I hear when I talk to the private sector in Sweden, they are very interested, like property owners and also shop owners and restaurant owners. They're not in the way. I mean, they really want to do something, and because they can see the gain and the profit in it,
the value of it.
Yeah, the value. Yeah.
So you think the municipality should be the player number one in this game to start this initiative?
Yeah, in Sweden, I think nothing will happen unless the municipality decides to start to collaborate and invite private actors. But they have to be clear that they invite them within a certain framework.
Of course. And what do you think are the challenges in this kind of agreements between different actors?
So there are many challenges. One challenge, so I really believe in the ideas that is promoted by Project for Public Spaces, the organization in New York, for example, that to have processes for transformation be led by place. So one challenge is, of course, to gather a representative selection of actors around the place. There is an example in in one city in north of Sweden, Umeå, where they actually got property owners around the street to pay for a redesign of a street from a car street to a pedestrian street. But there was one property owner that didn't want to, and so they were like 10 property owners that paid for it and one did not, which was kind of strange. But these things can happen. So of course there are challenges in the local community as well to get everyone in the right way, to everyone has the right amounts of power and influence over a design process. I think that goes back to the municipality again, because it's only the public sector that can be a democratic institution. So if the public sector, the municipality, takes a lead of that kind of coalition or a partnership around the place, you can ensure that it is equal, or it's democratic thing. Then of course there is another challenge in areas where you have scarce economic resources. I mean, in city districts where property values are very low, you have a population with low income, low education, these kind of challenging socially and economically places. There you have to find other ways of engage people. There are examples to show that of course this is possible, but then you have to find other means of engagement, because maybe the money isn't there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a kind of, you have the guidelines, you have the model, but it's a place specific. Like it depends on the actor around that place.
Yes.
And you should like tweak your model to fit it to that place and these actors.
Yeah.
But Alex, do you see in the future that many cities going to work with this model, the co-partnership of a public space?
Yes, I think that's what the report and my study shows, that there are so many good examples and so many successful examples, especially in New York, that now many people are looking at these examples and say, can we do a similar thing? So I would say looking at Stockholm and in Swedish cities, there is a huge discussion, and many processes and collaborations are being discussed. So it's really ongoing. It feels that we just started this thing. But I mean, when you talk to the people in New York, so everyone is looking at New York, but when you talk to the planning administration in New York, when you talk to the Times Square Alliance in New York, which should be the most advanced bid maybe in the world, they also have challenges, and they are struggling with things, and they want to renew themselves, and they're looking around for different models. So it's not only that the solution is in New York, but I think there you have so many good examples that proves that this is this can work, especially in societies where you have a strong public sector, we have strong private sector. So I cannot see any major limitations why we couldn't work in Swedish cities, Scandinavian cities, and I know there are a lot of things going in London. They have come very far as well. I think they have 50 or 70 business improvement districts in London, so it's really active there as well.
Yeah, and I was reading through your research. It's very interesting. Where can people find your research?
Yeah, so the report we're talking about, public space making, it's can be downloaded from spacescape.se, and also I have a personal website with my old artist name, stockholmcyclo.com, where there's some information on my book, and also on the other things that I have published.
Alex, what is your favorite public space that you would love to be there every morning, every afternoon? That you just want to be there.
That's always a difficult question, but I think there is a problem if you ask like an urban planner.
Yes.
When you come to a place, you always have the ideas that it could be better.
Exactly.
So everywhere you come, it's like, well, this is so great, but if you just
Yeah.
okay, this is maybe a very general answer, but I think it seems like it's a very nice place to be when you see other people enjoying themselves. I think that's very much the case when you go to waterfronts. If you go to beaches or quayside promenades where the city meets water, I think in that particular interface there is so much good things happening, and you can see, and you have Paris plage, you have the beaches anywhere in Barcelona, or you have the quaysides of Stockholm going along the water. In any city, it seems like the very quality of the water, when it meets the activity of the city, there is something. Recreation and activity meets.
Yeah.
You have the best of both worlds. Something
Wow,
like
so
that.
this is the interesting part of the world for you to enjoy.
Yeah.
So you also, when you go to a public space, you start your scanning. Oh, what's here? What's the value could be created?
Yeah, that's the handicap that you have. This disability that you have as a planner. You're always within your work.
Yeah.
Like you're never out of work.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful that you have it livable. You just, as you breathe, you just looking at the city and how can you make it better to make life easier for the people. I enjoy it for myself.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time and for all your great ideas that you're sharing with us. We're almost in the end of this episode, and I would love to ask you the last two questions. First one, that 3 takeaway messages, and the second one, 3 hashtags.
3 hashtags. Okay. That like to use for Twitter or
It's for when I publish it on different social media.
Aha, okay. So hashtags, that would be probably public space, placemaking, and urban development or something.
Great. And the 3 takeaway messages.
I usually, when I do my lectures on conferences and so on, sometimes I finished with like 3 bullet points. Number 1, make a vision which is measurable. So make it very clear objective what you want to achieve, and try to make that measurable in any way. Okay, so number 2, follow that vision in every detail and in every phase. So go into the vision if you want to make, I don't know, a walkable street. It has to go down to the very curb, to the very materials, to everything that you do. And the phase from where you start, maybe you start with a temporal design and then you go to permanent design. Everything has to follow in all details from the vision. And number 3, analyze and measure what you are doing so you can tell about it to everyone. My experience is that everyone really, in the end, loves data. and maybe if they say that, oh, you don't have to measure everything, and the most important lies cannot be measured, blah blah blah. You see it in the newspapers. The numbers are so powerful. So if you can describe and measure what you are doing, the number of people walking, the number of people sitting, the number of children playing, the air quality, the noise levels, anything that you can measure can be so powerful in describing what you have done and if you have achieved your vision.
Exactly. If you can measure it, you can improve it as well.
Yes. And sometimes you cannot measure everything, but as soon as you can measure it, it becomes powerful.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again, Alex, and hopefully see you in the next coming episode as well. I guess you have so many stories to tell about urban planning.
Thank you so much, Mustafa.